I'd like to just quickly get started with a little bit of a disclaimer, and that is that the League of Women Voters of Naperville, we do not have a position on this particular legislation, which we're going to be talking about today, which is the House Bill 3653. This information here is to really help you voters, to have a better understanding of what this House bill is all about and how it will be impacting our city and policing in our city. So we are so delighted to have Chief Marshall here. Very warm welcome to you. And let me just give you a brief introduction. So Bob Marshall started his career in law enforcement with the Will County, Illinois Sheriff's Department before joining the Naperville Police Department. During his 28 years with the Naperville Police Department, wow, he has held many positions from patrol officer to captain in command of the investigations and patrol divisions. He then served as the assistant city manager, as well as the city manager pro tem from the city of Naperville until he was appointed to the chief of police for the Naperville Police Department back in May of 2012. So delighted to have you here today. And we have lots of interest in this. So we had well over 60 participants register for this event, and they'll be coming on. Many of them are here already. I'm watching the participants rack up. So just a lot of interest in what this means and what this means for our city and what this means for you. So this is not a gotcha interview. This is just an informational interview where we want to seek to understand your knowledge and your expertise about this bill and how it'll affect Naperville. So no surprises, just the facts. Are you ready to begin?
I am, Kelly, and I just want to thank the League of Women Voters for giving me the opportunity to represent our police department, our community, and answer everybody's questions on the House bill and how it's going to impact our service to the community and, of course, our police officers.
Well, thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And I really just wanted to start off with a little bit of education for our league members around, the police department. Just, do you mind sharing briefly a little bit of background on the police department? Maybe share the scope, the scale, what type of services, what type of officers do we have? What type of services does the police department provide?
Okay, Kelly, I'd be glad to. So I can run down the questions you sent me because that is in the introduction. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and I'll ask you the questions one by one. So if you just want to start with a little bit of background on the police department for starters, then I'll ask the next couple of questions.
Okay, so in terms of how many police, so our department is broken up with sworn officers as well as non-sworn personnel. So we have 177 sworn police officers serving the city of Naperville, 97 non-sworn members of our department. And what that means is that people that provide support to our sworn officers. For example, we have our own 911 dispatch center here, which dispatches police and fire to our community as well as the Park District. We have evidence technicians. We have community service officers. We have, a crime prevention unit made up of non-sworn personnel. We have social workers, 3 currently. We're scheduled to have our 4th social worker on board next week. So those are some of the duties and responsibilities of our sworn as well as our non-sworn personnel. So a total of 274 people work at the Naperville Police Department.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you want to talk a little bit about the training that goes into each of the police officers, just high level?
Yeah, sure. Be glad to. And I'll attach that to our hiring process. So most people are not aware that the police chief does not hire police officers. We have a board of fire and police commissioners. These are 5 Naperville residents appointed to the board by the mayor, and they also have elected a chairman. So they do all the hiring for the Naperville Police Department. They do they administer the written test, the physical ability test, the psychological, the polygraph, let's see what else, the interview, as well as the medical. So what the police department does is we do the backgrounds. We do an extensive background on every candidate that applies for the police department. Additionally, we're very active in terms of recruitment. It's our responsibility, all 274 of us, to be recruiters, to promote the Naperville Police Department so that we get the best candidates to work in the police department. So So for example, for hiring, we have an eligibility list that is 2 years in length. And we just went through a hiring process in 2020. And we are very proud of the results from our recruitment process, which saw 800 people make application to the Naperville Police Department. 450 took our written test, 315 passed, and we did so good that Time Magazine has interviewed myself and one of our deputy chiefs about our success with our recruitment program to get that many applicants. Because what we're seeing in the trend around the country in 2020 was individuals were not seeking careers in law enforcement based on the challenges we as a country went through in 2020 with the civil unrest, the pandemic, and now, of course, the House bill has put challenges on recruitment. But we didn't see that here in Naperville, and we're very proud of that. We've also been able to show tremendous success in recruiting minority candidates, because one of our top recruitment objectives is to make sure our police department reflects the community we serve. So one of the statistics that I'm proud to talk about is the number of applicants tested. And one of the changes we made in 2020 was we eliminated the $45 application fee. What that meant is I thought that was a disparate impact on people in the low income areas. And we do require a college degree, a 4-year degree, to be hired with the police department. So individuals who just graduate from college, and I go back to my days, I didn't have a lot of money. So I couldn't, every department you applied for, if you have to pay $45, guess what? You're not going to apply to many departments. So we eliminated that $45 application fee, and that's contributed to the many applicants that we had in 2020. So the number of Hispanic males, African-American males, and African-American females dramatically increased in 2020. Significant increase from 2018, when it was what was the last time we gave a test. So I just wanted to highlight that part of our recruitment. Part of our success is a collaborative effort we had with NCTV, which we have a recruitment video. And all people have to do is go to YouTube and type in Naperville Police recruitment video, and you'll see what we've done, because we know we had to change the way we recruit, especially in 2020 with the pandemic, which we couldn't go to many of the college fairs that we used to. So we got our recruitment video out there to, again, encourage people to apply and take the Naperville police test. So we're very proud of that. The other change we made is we now allow lateral entries. What that means is that we can recruit and hire individuals who work in other law enforcement agencies, and they can come in. So we have an eligibility list for the candidates that are on the list, but we can also use a list we've established from lateral entry, meaning that we can take the best of the best from other police departments. The other chiefs don't particularly, are overjoyed with that, obviously, because they're losing some of their top officers to come to work for Naperville. And right now we have approximately 100 people on that lateral entry list. What that does is that saves a significant amount of taxpayer dollars, because these are experienced officers that don't go to the police academy. And the police academy costs about $6,000 for each candidate. And that's 14 weeks. So we're able to get these trained officers that have already gone through the academy out on the road, serving our community much quicker with less cost. So we're very pleased to have those improvements in our overall hiring process.
Phenomenal recruitment and very interesting statistics there around the diversity efforts that you guys have taken. Do you want to talk a little bit about the training then? When they do come on board, how are we in the city of Naperville training our police officers and refreshing our police officers on, standards?
Sure, I'll be glad to. So when an officer is hired, they either go to the academy, or if they've already been to the academy and are certified as Illinois police officers, then we put them in our field training program with they're matched up with a field training officer. And that program has 4 cycles and a total of 20 weeks of field training that they go through all the training with another experienced officer who has been certified as a field training officer. So that's the training that we provide our new hires.
And then do the officers get routine training throughout their time with the city of Naperville?
Absolutely. So one of my objectives when I was appointed police chief in 2012, that's the first thing I looked at, was the number of training hours our officers were receiving. And I was disappointed to see that we were averaging around 20 hours of training per year per officer. And our budget was $35,000. Today, we're over 100 hours per officer in training, and our budget is $250,000, because my emphasis is that we have to have highly trained, well-trained police officers. And frequently what I say is the only difference between our crime rate and crime rates in larger cities like New York, LA, Chicago is frequency. We get the same crimes that they do, we just get less of them. And believe me, I'm not complaining about that at all. But so we have to train more. So when we do have these serious crimes, that we know how to handle them. And the best way to do that was through our training. In fact, right now, all of our officers go through in-service training. And we're in the process of going through in-service training right now, where we're talking about our use of force policy. This fall, we'll be doing another session on implicit and explicit bias training. In addition to what we're doing right now, we're going over our general order and our training on pursuit driving. We're training our officers again on duty to intervene. And then again, that's one of the items in the new legislation. We've had that in place for years within our Naperville Police Department. We train obviously how to use force. We're going through that training again to try to, again, constantly train our officers in de-escalation strategies and techniques, as well as, and we've abolished chokeholds years ago. So we have other methods to gain compliance when it's necessary.
So specifically with the House Bill 3653, what type of operations will impact the Naperville Police Department the most?
Okay, since we're going to go into specifically the House Bill questions, I'd really like to start off with a comment about police reform. Us in law enforcement and my fellow chiefs around the state are not opposed to police reform at all. We welcome it. We look forward to a continuous improvement. And that's within our Naperville police culture. That's been in our culture for decades. We are always looking to make things better with new legislation, with new case law, with new techniques. Obviously, the explosion in technology and the criminal element using technology, we have to constantly train our officers and be willing to adjust and change. So we welcome, police reform efforts. We support accountability for our officers. We hold our police officers accountable. When they do something wrong, they're held accountable in the Naperville Police Department, and we have systems in place to ensure that that happens. Certification is another area that we have advocated for as Illinois police chiefs for the last 4 or 5 years. We want officers that we terminate through just cause, in which they've been accorded all of their police officer Bill of Rights, and they're terminated. They ought to be decertified. What is happening currently is that they are going to other police departments. And I had a specific case in Naperville where I terminated an officer with just cause for violating the Constitution and our numerous police policies here. After termination, the officer went through arbitration. The arbitrator sustained my decision to terminate, and within 6 months, he was hired by another police department. We as police chiefs in Illinois think that is unacceptable. So we welcome many of the items in this legislation. There are some other items in the legislation that cause us to pause and ask questions and to really understand the intent of some of this legislation. Again, it's over 700 pages, so we're still working through it. And I'm a member of the Illinois Chiefs. We have a legislative committee that's working with the sponsors of the bill, as well as the Illinois Sheriff's Association, the state's attorneys, all of us. There's a coalition that is working very hard to understand the impact of the legislation and how it's going to impact our police department and the community and the residents we serve. So that is an ongoing process, and we are hopeful for a trailer bill to answer some of the many questions we have.
Great.
So your question about how will it affect the operation of the Naperville Police Department? Almost the entire bill will have some impact on the operations of the Naperville Police Department and the police departments throughout the state of Illinois. Some of the key parts of that legislation, and I just mentioned one of them, the certification and decertification of police officers, custodial arrest for Class B and Class C misdemeanors are not going to be allowed. The use of force, that is a comprehensive area that we're looking at. How the use of force, that the law that we've had in place, how is that going to change with this new legislation? The next item is military equipment. The current legislation bans certain types of military equipment and how that's going to impact our department. Some of the items that I've looked at the legislation, such as tracked devices, which that means tanks, are disallowed, bayonets, things that we would never have here in the city of Naperville anyway, so I don't see that much of an impact on our operations. Body cameras. The body camera law was passed 5 years ago. The only difference this year with this body camera legislation is that it's mandatory. And it also includes specific legislation on how the body camera footage should be used by police departments. We have some concerns with that language in that one specific area that's going to affect our operations is the legislation indicates that police officers are not going to be able to look at their body cam footage prior to writing a police report. And we have some major concerns with that because right now I encourage all of our officers, because currently we have in place an in-car video and audio system, and we've had that in place for the last 5 to 6 years. And when we're involved in a situation that that is traumatic, is stressful, the force sciences that we've studied, the brain can only take in so much due to a traumatic, stressful incident. And there's a lot of things that a police officer when on the scene doesn't see because we've done our research with police psychologists is that, you know, you have a tendency during a stressful situation to have tunnel vision. So you may not see everything that is occurring around you. So currently we encourage our officers to look at the video prior to documenting what they've seen in a police report. That new legislation will forbid officers from looking at the video prior to writing a police report. And if they do, they could be charged with a felony. That's unacceptable. So again, we're working with our legislators to really understand the intent of that and hopefully straighten out some of the language that we have concerns with through a trailer bill. The next item is the training curriculum, which I've already talked about. We embrace all the training that is in the legislation, such as crisis intervention training. Currently we have 80 police officers, sworn and non-sworn, certified in crisis intervention in the city of Naperville. We just had a class 2 weeks ago in which 30 additional officers were trained. And that includes our non-sworn as well, trained in crisis intervention. So we embrace that training. There's also training on use of force, training on duty to intervene, which I mentioned earlier, we're already doing. We're way ahead of the training curriculum that has been proposed in this legislation. Complaints against police officers is another area. Anonymous complaints the law states that we have to take anonymous complaints. We've been doing that for years because when I look at anonymous complaint, that doesn't mean there's not an author, right? That just means that the person is not identifying themselves for a variety of reasons. So when we get an anonymous complaint, we have many mechanisms in place to still investigate those anonymous complaints. So that doesn't change the way we operate at all. The one item is that the abolishment of the sworn affidavit, meaning that when an individual files a complaint against a police officer, they have to put it in writing and then they have to sign a sworn affidavit that verifies that what they're saying is accurate and factual. That has been eliminated. We will still take statements from people because we need those statements because we need to investigate the allegation of misconduct on the part of an officer. And I can talk a little bit about how we hold officers accountable right now with regard to complaints. And I understand that there's members of the community that will say, why would I go to the police department to file a complaint because the officer I'm complaining about might be there? So we understand that. So we take complaints online. We have a system where people can complain online. I have a phone call. I got one today, in fact. People can call me direct, and I'll call this resident back in a little bit, and we'll take the complaint over the telephone. I have a commander that works directly for me. It's called in our Office of Professional Standards, and that commander investigates all allegations of misconduct on the part of any of our personnel here, whether it's sworn or non-sworn. We do a comprehensive investigation, and then we've actually taken complaints from people in the field. If an individual has fears about reporting to the police department, our commander actually has met with people at a Dunkin' Donuts, a Starbucks, whatever, to take that complaint. So there's many ways in which people can, if they feel that they've been mistreated by a member of our police department, there's many ways in which we can get that information besides having them come in person to the police department. And then we have a process, we have a general order that governs how we take those complaints, that we must communicate with the resident, we must complete the investigation within 30 days. And the resident is advised either by a phone call, or I actually write a letter with the outcome of that investigation. So we're accountable. If they have questions about my final decision, they can go to the city council, they can go to my boss, which is the city manager, or they can go to the DuPage or the Will County State's Attorney's Office if they don't like the decision I've made with regard to their case. So that was one of the changes that we have in place here. The abolishments of no-knock search warrants is one of the areas in there, unless there's extenuating circumstance, but all search warrants must be approved by the DuPage County State's Attorney's Office and signed by a judge. So even currently, I cannot authorize a no-knock search warrant. It must go through the court system. So that really has not changed. And all warrants that require no-knock, the last no-knock warrant we've done in Naperville was 20 years ago. So that is not a common practice in our department, unless there's, again, very serious extenuating circumstances where the individual that we are executing a search warrant may indicate harm to our police officers who are serving that search warrant. The other area is the no bail bond. So that has been talked about quite a bit, is that individuals who are under arrest do not have to post bail under certain circumstances. And that has been talked about quite a bit, that individuals can be released on basically I-bonds or notice to appears. So we're going to see how that plays out in terms of the new legislation. Currently, the state's attorney's office, when anybody shows up for a bond hearing, the state's attorney, there's two elements that judges look at when they release people on bond. Number one, what is the likelihood of that individual showing up for court? Because you have to remember, they have not been convicted yet. They've just been arrested. So they still have a court date. So that's number one. What is the likelihood the person is actually going to show up in court? Number two is, what is the likelihood that person, while out on bond, is going to commit the same or a similar offense or go after a potential victim? And judges have to make that decision whether or not there's a threat to public safety. That is still in place, even with the no bond. Judges still have the opportunity. And from what I've heard from the sponsors of the bill, the judges will be trained on how to do this. My experience with the judges is that they already know how to do this. They know how to evaluate the information, and then they make a decision if the person should be held without bond based on the criteria I've already talked about. So that is one of the other things. One of the other items that will affect our operations in 3 phone calls within 3 hours with a specific time limit. When we have people in custody, by law, they have the right to make phone calls. They can call their attorney. We have no problem with that in the Naperville Police Department. We allow people as many calls as they need, so they can call their attorney, they call family members. we have the right, there's no privacy unless it's the call to the attorney. We monitor those phone calls to make sure that they're not impacting an ongoing investigation. The only concern we have is it has to be within 3 hours. What happens if it's not, if they don't get in 3 hours? What is the remedy for that? So we're a little bit concerned about the time limit and how that's actually going to play out in a real life situation. So so basically of the 700 pages, pretty much a lot of them will affect police departments and the services to our residents. And I've highlighted just some of the key ones that we're working with.
That's great. Thank you. And can we go deeper into maybe the use of force? I hear about that a lot. And can you talk a little bit about how this language, the language proposed in the bill, is going to change the use of force for the Naperville Police Department?
Well, actually, first of all, I'll start that our use of force policy has been certified by the state of Illinois. So our current use of force policy was sent to the state of Illinois, the state police, and they evaluated it, and we have been certified with the use of force policy. Also, we are a member of the Commission for Law Enforcement Accreditation. What that means is that since 1992, our department has met a series of national standards around policies and procedures, specifically the area of use of force. And what that means is that these national standards that require specific things that we must do, that we are accountable for, along with proofs of compliance. And every 3 years, our department is opened up to an outside group of assessors who come in and evaluate our policies, our procedures, specifically the area of use of force, and also our compliance. So these assessors come and they spend a week in our police department evaluating our policies, procedures, and they actually spend time watching our training, again, to make sure that we're training exactly to the policies and procedures, and so that we're in compliance. And that group has also certified our current use of force policy. So one of the things we're looking at with our use of force policy is that many of the suggested changes in the use of force policy will not impact us at all because we're already doing them. And within the use of force, we're talking about duty to intervene, not using chokeholds. Some of the things I've already mentioned, it's already in our policy, we train to it. So the new legislation really is going to minimally affect how we use force right now. Now, there's one area that we're working on is, for example, within the use of force policy in the legislation is where we can deploy the tasers on a human body. So we're looking for clarification on that, because one of the things it did, it eliminated certain areas we could tase individuals. The use of a taser is a non-lethal use of force. And we are very fortunate that we have tasers. Every one of our officers carry tasers, and as well as our supervisors. And they've been trained how to use them. And this is a very important aspect of the use of force policy because it de-escalates traumatic situations, especially our mental health calls. The last thing our police officers want to do is use deadly force on somebody suffering from a mental illness. So we've equipped our officers and trained them with less than lethal methods. With that includes the taser. It also includes beanbag, in which we equip our shotguns with beanbags, so we can take people down when they are advancing on an officer with a knife. And that just happened 6 months ago. And I watched a video in which an individual suffering from a mental illness approached our officers with a knife and a screwdriver. Our officers were able to de-escalate that situation using beanbag rounds, put that person down, take him into custody, and get him to a hospital for help, Linden Oaks specifically in this particular case. So it's very important that we are allowed to use less than lethal force. The last thing we want to do is use deadly force, like I mentioned earlier, on a person who is going through a mental health crisis. So we're still getting some clarity on that part of the bill and how we can use the taser.
That's great. Thank you. Specifically body cameras, you had mentioned that Naperville has been using, it sounded like you said in-car camera systems, not necessarily body cams. So did I get that right? Could you clarify do the officers wear body cams? And I know that's part of this legislation. So if not, how long and how much cost is this going to bring to the
Sure.
city?
Great question, Kelly. So body cameras is in the legislation. It's mandated. It is phased in. It's phased in the state of Illinois police departments by population. We're required in the city of Naperville to have body cameras on all our police officers by January 1st of 2023. We are very hopeful that we're going to have that project completed much earlier. In fact, last year, even before the legislation passed, I went to the city council for our 2020 capital improvement budget, and the city council approved $500,000 for police body cameras in the city of Naperville. Our project is already started. Right now, we're due to kick off our project within the next 2 months. We were setting up a team. We need our IT department, our legal department, as well as our police department to be part of this project. We have right now 30 individuals on our project team, and we'll be moving forward with many steps on our project plan to get this accomplished. And our goal is to have body cameras by the middle of 2022. Now that requires obviously a lot of research, testing. We have to go out for a RFP, a request for proposal, because there's many vendors that provide the body camera technology. We have to work with our state's attorney's office on policy procedures, as well as it probably involves the hiring of additional personnel, because with all this camera footage, we have to go through it all, because we anticipate, based on other departments that have body cameras, a tremendous increase in the amount of FOIAs we will receive. And we have to go through all that footage to make sure that certain things that aren't available for public view, such as a juvenile, would not be able, we'd have to redact that information. If we're on the scene of a domestic violence situation, we don't want probably the victim's photograph out there. So we're going to have to do a heavy amount of redaction, and we may require additional personnel to deal with the number of requests that we're going to get for FOIAs with regard to the multiple videos that we'll be taking.
FOIAs, what does the term FOIA mean?
Freedom of information.
Thank you. And so then you mentioned that there's something in the law. So not only do the police officers have to wear the body camera, but there are changes to how footage will be used. Can you say more about that?
How the footage will be used?
Yes.
In terms of the new legislation?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the thing we're working with the legislators about, allowing officers to look at the footage before they write their police reports. So we're hopeful to get some clarification in a trailer bill. And my understanding from the many meetings that I've been on with legislators, with community members, I was just on a Zoom panel with one of the sponsors, Senator Sims, that sponsored the legislation, and he indicated that they are open to having a trailer bill to answer some of the questions we've had about some of the legislation. And that session, what he said was that by May 31st, when the session goes when that next session ends, the trailer bill language must be completed. So there's a timeline within the next 60 days that has to be done. And I'm hearing we are making progress with that. Again, I'm represented by the coalition of police chiefs that have been working in Springfield with the legislators to clarify some of the language we have some questions about.
I love the intent, though. I mean, it's feeling very much like the sentiment is we're all for reform, but there are some confusing points to this legislation that might impact your ability to actually do a great job. So I think that's coming through very loud and clear. I wanted to move to the next question, which is around, will the House bill change arrest and release from the law enforcement custody in Naperville?
Yeah, that's I think you're talking about the no bail.
The no bail, yes.
Yeah. So well, we're obviously going to track that and monitor it. So we're going to look at facts and data on what happens when people are released without posting bond. And I understand the intent is, to remove the monetary issue. I mean, we've used that technique, that strategy for decades meaning that, if an individual is arrested, to get out of jail, they must post finances, right? They must post money. So one of the concerns that the sponsors brought up was, people who have resources can post bond and get out. People who don't have resources end up sitting in jail. So this is really about fairness, and we will be looking on that. Hopefully it does work, that when people are I-bonded and they're given notice to appear rather than, brought into custody, they will show up in court and they won't commit additional crimes while on bond. The one disturbing fact that I've already heard from our state's attorney, who's monitored this so far, people who receive notice to appears or I-bonds, 53% of them are not returning for court. So that is problematic, and that is in this legislation. So that's data that he has already been aware of. 53% are not showing up for court. So as of the early returns on the data, it's not being effective. What that means is that people don't show up in court. We have to then serve arrest warrants, and we have to go look for them. And then so a notice to appear, the warrant would then say failure to appear in court. And then we as police employees are searching for them, trying to find them, arresting them, and then bringing them into custody for failure to appear in court. So we're looking at that. The other thing that is concerning for us is the inability to take people in custody for Class B and C misdemeanors. I think you're talking about that as well. So the example I use is trespassing, which is a Class B misdemeanor. Numerous times, multiple times during the week, we'll get a call from a resident or a business saying, we have an individual on our property and we don't want him there. He or she is creating a disturbance. Or we'll get calls from family members that have a relative in their residence, on their yard, that they don't want there anymore. Typically, we go there, we have to give verbal notice, from the person who owns the property and say, you're not welcome here anymore. You have to leave. And then sometimes they leave, sometimes they don't. If they refuse, we take them into custody. Based on this new legislation, we're not going to be able to do that anymore. Meaning that we'll go to a resident's home. The one I use is the trespassing, and an individual is in your home or on your property, and we'll respond, and we'll give this person an order to leave. If they don't leave, we can issue them a notice to appear, but that doesn't mean that they will leave. I mean, we deal with people who are not compliant all the time, right? I mean, if everybody was compliant, our job would be much easier as police officers. So that is the area of the law that we have some major concerns with. And again, it's really about the citizens, that we're going to have to drive away and say, sorry, that person's on your property and we can't do anything about it unless they are a public safety concern. And then we'd probably, if they're threatening an act of violence, obviously we'd have another charge to be, if they're threatening violence such as a domestic, or they have a weapon, or they made a threat to shoot somebody, then we would have another crime and we'd make an arrest for that.
So we have a couple clarifying questions just from the audience. Can you explain Class B and Class C in a little bit of a more detailed level? And then what is an I-bond?
So I can start with the I-bond. So the I-bond is basically that you sign a form that says you promise to appear. And so you're released basically on your own recognizance. Okay. It's your word to the court that on a certain day, for example, on May 15th, I will show up in court. So it's just a signature that you promise to appear. That's what an I-bond is. And the other question, Kelly, was what? So
Class B, you had said trespassing is an example of that. Class B and Class C, are these just, not dangerous type of offenses to the public? Can you just give us a bit more definition of what that means?
Sure. So the FBI has classified crimes into Part 1, which are 8 of the more serious crimes. Those are called Part 1. Those are crimes such as armed robbery, burglary, murder, sexual assaults, arson, some of the burglary to motor vehicle, some of the more serious crimes. Those are the 8 Part 1 crimes. Part 2 crimes are your class, and actually it's Class A, B, and C misdemeanors. So they are your less serious crimes that, and examples, would be like driving offenses. Driving under the influence of alcohol, driving under the influence of drugs is a Class A misdemeanor. So obviously we'd still be able to take people in custody for that offense. Class B and Class C are your less serious violations, such as disorderly conduct and some of the more minor offenses that we deal with. Littering is a Class C misdemeanor, for example.
And so if you do have a disorderly conduct, your point there is that you cannot take them into custody for that. However, if they start to become a threat to society, there's a public threat, you have reason to make a move.
That's right. That is correct.
Understood. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay, so switching gears, and just in the interest of time, I want to make a quick call for, if you have any questions, you can feel free to continue to use the Q&A feature. We're going through some prepared questions right now, but we're happy to take a few minutes for open questions. Let's shift gears and just talk about training. You talked about the hours that you're providing, and you have done a tremendous job upping those hours and upping the budget. But in the events that have taken place over the last year or so, are there ways in which the Naperville police officers are receiving specific training, like de-escalation or mental health training, those kinds of things? Can you comment on that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So 5 years ago, we changed our entire training model to focus more on scenario-based de-escalation training. And what that means is that we take scenarios that we have captured on video through our in-car audio and video system, and then we design our training program around that, so that we are actually training to specific situations that have occurred here in Naperville. For example, this week we're doing our in-service training, and I just watched our traffic stop training that all of our officers are going through the beginning of this year. And it's an actual scenario where we have an individual. For example, sometimes we'll make traffic stops and individuals just will refuse to provide their driver's license or proof of insurance. And then we ask them to exit the vehicle. And this is the scenario I just watched. And we have actors play this. We have a very robust internship program here. Right now we have 12 interns, and they are actors in our actual scenario-based training. And so one of the interns is sitting in the driver's side of the vehicle, and he refuses to provide identification. Our officers politely ask him to exit the vehicle, and he refuses. So then what do we do right now? Based on the violation, which is a traffic violation, and the current law is that we have the right to ask that person to exit the vehicle. If they refuse, then we have to then use force. So we've trained our officers how to use force to remove that individual. Now, we've also had a scenario where we had an individual under the influence of narcotics or under the influence of alcohol, and they lock the door and they put their hands at 10-2, and they refuse to comply with our lawful order to exit the vehicle. So we have to train our officers, how are we going to get that person out of that vehicle? So my point is that these are actual scenarios that our officers deal with on a daily basis. So we train to that. So that's our training with regard to scenario-based. And I talked a little bit about how we de-escalate. Now, we provide the de-escalation training, and that is primarily done through our crisis intervention training. And I said, again, I just talked about our 40-hour class that just got over 2 weeks ago. So these are certified trainers from the state of Illinois, and we actually did it here in the police department. And what that program involves is they actually have actors who come out, and our officers go through this training, and there's actors that actually have certain, they portray certain mental illnesses, such as schizophrenia, a variety of mental illnesses, that these actors have, and then they have to act them out in our officers. And I just went through this training myself, and you have to decide how are you going to de-escalate that situation. And sometimes we use force. Most of the time we don't have to, because we've trained our officers through their verbal skills to de-escalate situation. And sometimes these situations, the ones I watched, they're not over in 5 minutes, right? We're talking to an individual, we're trying to establish a relationship and a rapport with them. We go to a variety of cases, and our mental health calls in 2020 set a new high in the city of Naperville with almost 1,000 mental health calls our officers are going to. Now we have a program in concert with our social workers. So our social workers will respond with our officers to help de-escalate situation. Sometimes we're on that scene for as many as 1, 2, sometimes 3 hours, multiple officers trying to de-escalate that situation. But the good thing is that my goal is to have 100% of our department trained and certified in mental health. Again, I mentioned we have 80 already, and we have 3 more sessions scheduled for the rest of 2021. So that is our scenario-based de-escalation crisis intervention training. We also have, all of our department has gone through implicit and explicit bias training. And we went through that in 2018 with the Aurora Police Department. All of our command staff went through 3 days of training. In 2019, all of our officers went through it. And I have 3 of our officers and 1 commander trained. We use a train the trainer approach sometimes, meaning that they are trained, they are certified implicit and explicit bias instructors. And this fall, all of us will be going through that training again, because one of the things about training, you have to reinforce the training. You just can't do it once and say, okay, we're done. We have to constantly upgrade our training, again, to best practices, to the new standards that are required by, state law.
Right. Right.
And domestic violence is one of the other training. One of the things we saw in 2020, I'm sorry, I have to keep moving because the sun is right in my face. I should have brought my sunglasses, Kelly. But anyways, so domestic violence, in 2020, because of the pandemic, many of the people were sheltered in place at home, right? So we saw a significant increase in domestic violence. And unfortunately, because people in abusive relationships, many of the shelters were closed, so they didn't have anywhere to go. So we've upgraded our training on how to handle domestic violence situations, because unfortunately, we're seeing an increase in those. And that's where our social workers, and I just have to take a minute to compliment our social workers. I went to City Council last year's budget, and I was fortunate to get an additional 4 officers and an additional social worker. And one of our positions is a victim advocate, because domestic violence is a very serious situation, and people don't understand the court system. And so we have a social worker, and her title is the victim advocate. So she actually essentially holds hands with victims of domestic violence to work them through the court system and explain to them, how do you get an order of protection? How am I going to protect myself and my family in this abusive relationship? Because police officers, we respond, we calm the situation down, we make an arrest if we have to. In Illinois, it's mandatory arrest. If we determine that somebody has committed a battery, they go to jail. And there's no I-bonds for crimes like that. They are in jail because they have committed an act of violence against somebody they live with. So that's mandatory arrest. But then the follow-up, you still have to go to court. And our victim advocate is able to walk the victim through the court system, as well as provide benefits that victims of domestic violence are entitled to.
So much has changed, I think, in society, requiring so much more training and just resources to keep the police department actively servicing our community. And then this legislation, I'm recognizing that. Can you talk about just the resources? It sounds like body cameras, training, even more personnel, and personnel to manage the footage that you're going to get from the body cameras, but also more social workers. That looks good. Do you feel like we have, as a city, enough resources to implement all these required changes, just because life has gotten more complicated, but also with this legislation?
Well, one of the things that trouble me about legislation that comes out of Springfield, and this is not the first time I've seen this, which is called unfunded mandates. They tell us all to do this. We're fortunate in Naperville that we've already budgeted $500,000 for body cameras. Within the legislation is no funding mechanism. And I've been advocating for where's all this marijuana money going? Right. We were told when that legislation passed in Springfield that some of that money and it's millions and millions of dollars from the legalization of marijuana. We were told in law enforcement as police chiefs that some of that money would be relegated towards some of the resources we need, such as paying for body cameras. Again, we're fortunate in Naperville. What about the other communities that don't have the resources we do? Most of the police departments in Illinois have less than 20 officers. How are they going to be able to fund body cameras? And there's no funding mechanism in this legislation. All the training I talked about, again, because it's a, it's a top priority of this police department, and our council has been very generous with the amount of money that I've requested for training, we're covered. But what about some of these other departments? And what about ongoing training when we're going to have to add personnel for the body cameras?
Right.
So our concern as police chiefs is these unfunded mandates, and we're still sorting out the legislation. We don't know exactly how much more this is going to cost, not only the police department, but our citizens.
Right.
Is this legislation going to result in more crime? Because we know, based on the legislation, there's going to be less criminals jailed. They're going to be out there. So is that going to place our residents in more jeopardy of criminal behavior? Stuff that we are going to be tracking very closely. I just read an article yesterday where right now there's a 25% decrease in the number of people that are in jail. And I understand that they had to get them out of jail because of COVID, right? But they're out there, and we're hopeful that the Department of Corrections has some solid rehabilitation programs. When people come out of prison, they need to have resources for employment. And I'm sure you're going to ask me about defunding police, right? And I changed that terminology, and we in our police organizations, we don't talk about defunding. That's a crazy idea to defund policing. What we want to do is reallocate funds to some of the non-for-profit organizations, some of the treatment centers that people need for addictions, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, mental illness. Shift some of that money to organizations like that. Fund Linden Oaks better. Some of the Rosencrantz. Give them more money so they can treat people who are addicted to substances, alcohol, and mental illness. So we don't say defund, we say reallocate funds to organizations such as that. I hope that answered your question.
Very much, yeah. And just timing. So you talked a little bit about the trailer bill, this current legislation, the trailer bill. What is the timing of when all of this really has to be implemented?
Well, the Zoom call I was on, the panel I was on with Senator Sims, and there was a couple of the sponsors on the bill. What they said, there is timing. The governor has signed the legislation, so it's law. That's the way it is. We hope that the legislators are open and they don't think that this 776 pages is perfect. We're looking for, obviously, an opportunity to get some clarification. And the timing was within 60 days of the governor signing the bill, the trailer bill must be completed. And Senator Sims said that was, I think it was May 30th is what he gave the deadline. So that's what we're shooting for this session, the spring session down in Springfield. So we're hopeful that there will be some changes in the legislation to address some of the concerns we have and many of the questions we have.
And you're influencing that through your coalition of chiefs?
Yes, we're working with our coalition of chiefs. Myself, I've talked to every single local legislator and explained the legislation and the concerns, the questions we've had. I have a deputy chief that's on one of the subcommittees working on the legislation, going through this legislation, line by line. Our state's attorney's offices have been involved from a legal perspective to look at the legislation and recommend certain changes to clarify some of the questions we have currently about the legislation.
And probably maybe this is a little early to answer. I'll go ahead and ask it. I think it's on people's minds. Assuming the legislation gets implemented as is, do you feel the city is safer?
Well, I have concerns.
Yeah.
I will say that quite candidly. I have concerns. I'm concerned about police officers. The good issue was the qualified immunity was not in the bill, which is a concern to us in law enforcement. Qualified immunity means that if we're acting in good faith and that we can't be sued or liable for a mistake we made. Again, we are police officers. We're human beings. We make mistakes. If we're acting in good faith, we should not have our liability and our protections removed from us. So that was a good part of the bill that didn't get in the bill. So we're happy with that. I'm concerned with regard to how it's going to impact us in keeping our community safe. So we will be watching that. Again, the legislation is out there. We in law enforcement, we've faced many challenges. Look at 2020 with the civil unrest, some of the dislike, the hate directed at our police officers here. Today I heard officers tell me, we had a wellness meeting today in which, some of the residents, and it's a minority, I must say, as our police officers drive by, they're getting obscene gestures thrown at them, hateful language, that is going on right now. So that concerns me about the well-being of, and the mental health of our police officers who are serving this community. So we're still dealing with the impact of 2020 and some of the impacts of civil unrest. People still call 911 and we still go, and we will continue to go. We look at this legislation, this is just a challenge for us, and we will overcome it. We will continue to serve the community. We will still respond to 911 calls. We will still respond to non-emergency calls to serve our community, because that's the oath we've taken. Do we like some of the things in the legislation? Absolutely not. And we're concerned about our residents who have counted on us. And there's a small percentage that are hating on police in this community, the majority. And I have evidence to show how supportive our community has been for our officers. The courageousness that they responded to the civil unrest when they were under fire by some of the protesters that turned violent in our downtown specifically. So we're still dealing with the aftermath of that. And then on top of that, we have the stress of the legislation. And so our police families, they're concerned. They're concerned about their careers and what it's going to look like going forward. So to a long answer to your question about will our community be less safe, we as a police department, we will do our best to ensure that our community still is one of the safest communities in the United States. That's our dedication and that's our commitment. And we're hopeful that the trailer bill will clarify some of the issues that we're concerned with.
Thank you for that response. There was a question, and did you want to comment? I know we only have a few more minutes with you of your time. We appreciate that very much, but about just the unrest that happened in our own city. And I think a concern raised here among the league members about the injured officers and the damaged businesses. But do you feel like there is anything you can comment on in terms of the final outcome of that?
Sure, Kelly. I mean, I've been a police officer in Naperville for 3 decades. I have never seen anything like what happened June 1st. I mean, we were prepared because we knew the incidents happened in Aurora the night before, but we didn't have a lot of advance notice with regard to the tremendous amounts of violence that occurred after George Floyd's death. And we had 2 demonstrations on that Saturday and Sunday with 300 to 400 people that were all peaceful. We had a police presence there. We helped people exercise their First Amendment rights, which is our commitment and our responsibility to ensure people's First Amendment rights so people can lawfully protest and demonstrate. We're 100% behind that, and we protect people's rights. When all of a sudden it switched from lawful to unlawful, and we had prepared as best as we could. In fact, around noon on that Monday, I started making calls to other jurisdictions because our intel said that we could have the potential for damage in the city of Naperville. We requested mutual aid from other departments, and guess what we were told by the other departments, including the Department of Homeland Security, the state police, the National Guard. They were already deployed in other areas, such as the city of Chicago, which, if you remember, was going through some very violent demonstrations. So we didn't get the resources we needed. So we had to deal with 400 people and taking over our downtown with probably 40 police officers, totally outnumbered. The mayor and I worked on a curfew order, meaning that after 8 o'clock, nobody could be on the streets. Well, we're not going to be able to arrest 300 to 400 people for violation of curfew. We just didn't have the resources to do it. And many of those people in that crowd, because we were monitoring through our incident command center, which is here at the police department with all video, and we had drones up. We were watching the crowds. Many of the people were caught in the wash that were there peacefully to demonstrate. Now, I've been asked and criticized for not using more force with those demonstrators by yet not tear gassing them. But we don't use blanket techniques on or blanket strategies when you have a whole group of people that are violating curfew. And I saw many of them were young people, 19, 20 years old, that were caught in the wash with these violent protesters. That's why we don't deploy strategies and mass tear gassing of everybody, because there's many people there that were lawfully protesting that were just caught up in the wash. Fortunately, we've been able to identify many of the criminals, because the criminals, obviously they didn't realize that we had things under video, and we have DNA, because many of the businesses were broken into. We were able to cover blood and identify people through DNA. We had videos, the same thing you're watching what happened in the Capitol. All the number of people that were identified after the fact that have been arrested. We've arrested right now at least 20 people that violated laws in our downtown and committed acts of violences. And some of them have been charged with federal crimes, such as the individual who threw the bomb at our police officers. He's been arrested and he's charged federally. We also were able to charge the individual who threw a bomb into Egg Harbor, attempted to start that business on fire. Fortunately, we were able to put that out. We identified that person and he was charged federally as well. So we've made several arrests as a result of that. But again, I thank you for the question on last summer. And I just want to stress the majority of those summer protests were lawful, and we provided an escort. We made contact with the sponsors. When they crossed the roadways, we were very tolerant and allowed them to use the roadway. Again, that's against the law. You can't block a roadway. We could have arrested everybody for blocking the roadway. We did not. We used tolerance, we used good sound judgment, and then help people get across so that they were able to express their First Amendment rights.
Amazing. I appreciate you responding to that. And I will just let you know the chat is supportive, very supportive. And actually that is kind of how I'll wrap today's session, which is the residents want to know how they can help and how they can raise concerns, or how to contact even you and the police department with further questions, with shows of support, or even with any concerns. What would be your advice?
So, and thank you for this opportunity, because one of the things that I always talk about when I get a group this size is help us with our Lock It or Lose It campaign. Please, 90% of our burglaries in the city of Naperville are due to people not locking their cars, leaving their houses unlocked, and more troubling, leaving their cars unlocked is leaving their keys or their fobs and their valuables within their unlocked cars. I've watched way too many videos, and we get the videos. We're partners with the residents on Ring Doorbell or Nest. Well, they'll send us the video where we see these individuals. There's 4 or 5 of them in a car. They pull in front of a residence and they get out and they walk up in a driveway, usually at 2 or 3 in the morning, and they're pulling on door handles to see if the car opens up. So Lock It or Lose It campaign. I mean, go to our website. We have crime prevention tips on there. Last year, we set a new record in the city of Naperville for fraud, unemployment fraud, scams that individuals are committing upon our residents. Go to our website. We have crime prevention tips. We have the top 10 scams that people, that the criminals, prey on our residents for, and we have suggestions on what to do. So go to our website. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. You can contact me direct. My contact information, Kelly, I'd be glad to give it to you. Yeah. I'm very easy to find. I'm on Twitter. I have, all you have to do is follow Chief R. Marshall at Twitter. I'm tweeting. We have a city Twitter. So we use social media extensively. We have a communications specialist working out of the police department. So we're open, we're transparent. We want feedback from our residents, and we want to let them know the many programs we have to keep our communities safe.
Thank you. This has been such a delight. I really appreciate your time. You're a very busy person, but you were so responsive and jumped at this opportunity. So judging by the attendance today, I can tell you it was an important topic for our league. And thank you very much for your open, honest, very transparent answers, and appreciate it. I hope everyone has a great rest of your sunny day.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you,
We'll see
Lee.
soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.